I think the biggest thing that I had to unlearn was, or work at, was not feeling shame, because I was attaching the absence of boundaries to like my self-worth, being a people pleaser and all that kind of stuff. It was a long time where I couldn't even like look at myself in the mirror. I know that probably sounds, I don't know, dramatic, but genuinely, I would avoid it because I just was so disgusted with what I saw. But a lot of that, like I said before, went back to traumas that I had experienced. But so I think on a basic level, just finding a way to love the skin that you are currently in, not having that mindset of, well, I'll feel better or I'll feel happier or others will like me when I get to this certain appearance, whatever that is to you. And even if it is that you want to be healthier or you want to be able to move, easier and more freely, just feel better, having that be for you and like, and more about how you feel physically than trying to live up to some societal standard.
This is the Lirae Journey podcast on the McKissick Health Podcast Network. I'm Dr. Sherella Cupid, your host.
The Lirae Journey podcast is a space for Black women to choose themselves. For season 3, the theme is Love and. We'll continue the Sister Circle conversations with Black women from different stages of life within various roles regarding personal, community, and professional. The intention of the season is to continue and start conversations on the meanings, experiences, and practices around love in numerous areas. This is our grounding season because Lirae means love is real and eternal. So sis, let's practice love. So my first question is, Dr. Latasha Eley Kelly, just to introduce yourself in a couple of sentences.
Okay. I am Dr. Latasha Eley Kelly. Everyone calls me Tasha. Students call me Dr. Tasha, Dr. K, Dr. Kelly, whatever floats their boat. But I own the Millennial Black Professor, which is a small business and professional consulting firm. And also I recently founded TMBP Media, which is a newsroom dedicated to amplifying underrepresented voices in Wichita and beyond. And then I also teach at George Mason University virtually in their first year transitions program. And I teach English and African American studies for the University of Maryland Global Campus. I'm originally from Newport News, Virginia, so I always got to shout out 757, and now I live in Kansas.
That's beautiful. Okay, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that during our conversation. Okay, so what brings you to the Sister Circle space?
Honestly, sisterhood and storytelling would be the two key pieces of why I wanted to be in this space today.
Thank you. So in thinking about this season of your life, if you can name it, what would you name this season of your life?
Ooh, this season of my life, growth seems too simple of a word. But right now, that's the only word I can think of. But it's like, it's growth in the sense of, I think you can think of growth in terms of you're putting in work, like what's sprouting from the seeds that you've sown, but also growth in terms of just blessings on blessings on blessings that the Lord is bestowing upon you. Whether you put in the work for this particular thing or not, he sees something in you, he sees that you're ready, and he blesses you with it. That is more the season that I'm finding myself in right now. And it's sometimes really overwhelming because it's like how they talk about good and bad stress. It's a lot of good things happening all at one time. And it's challenging to take it all in because when you've lived a life of struggle and it just is like one thing after another, over and over, like just all the time, it's like you're constantly waiting. It's a trauma response, I know, but from therapy, but it's like you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so thankfully through therapy and other practices, like I've gotten to a place where I'm not in that space anymore, where I'm just steady. I can't even fully enjoy what is happening right now because I'm waiting for something bad to happen. Every once in a while, those thoughts do still creep in. But now I'm just really trying to practice being in the moment and just appreciating what's coming my way. So that's what I mean when I say growth. And it is also the result of like years of work that I've put in, but there's also stuff that I could not have imagined that is also coming my way. And I know that's just the Lord.
That's beautiful. So, in naming this season of your life growth due to the work that you have put in and due to blessings being manifested, how do you define love?
Ooh. I define love in one word. The best word I can think of is expectation. Because I think it covers the multitude of ways that love can manifest in your life. I know we talk sometimes about how other cultures, other languages have so many words for and ways of describing what we, bundle into just that one word of love or maybe like. And that always has fascinated me because, we say we love ice cream. We love, it could be whatever. And so I think it's so cool to think that there's actual language, not in the English language, but there's actual words for all these other ways that it shows up for us or in us. But I say expectation because while people like to like divorce love and conditions, I really don't think that is possible. I think there's always some level of expectation attached to love. And when I think even more about it, I've always had an uneasiness about people that I don't really know like that saying I love you to me and expecting me to say it back. And I was having a conversation with someone and they were like, well, just say it back. And I'm like, nah, because I like the person and we're friends, but I don't love that person. I don't have that relationship with them. I haven't even known them that long. And when I sit back and think about why do I feel so uncomfortable with that? Because I do know some people that will just say it right on back. But to me, there's weight to it. You know what I mean? And there's expectation that comes with it. I think even in those instances where the person has said, love you or whatever, and they're waiting for me to say it back, somewhere down the line, and this could be another trauma response now that I'm talking about it, but somewhere down the line, I'm thinking we're not on that level, because if you call on me for something that's on a different level, I don't have that relationship with you to where I would feel required to or a pulling to show up or fulfill it. And I don't want to set that expectation for you with just those 2-3 words, love you, or you know what I mean, or I love you. Maybe I'm like overthinking it, but that I think that's part of why I have such reservation about saying it to just any old body, because of the expectation that's attached to it.
That makes sense. And it also connects to what we're going to discuss today, right? We're going to talk about love and boundaries. So, in regards to you being mindful of who you say I love you to or love you or respond, right? If having an expectation and not meeting the expectation because you don't want to give false expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you unlearning concerning love and boundaries?
So that's the perfect segue, because then I'm like, well, maybe the reason why they are so able to freely say it is because even with that expectation, they know that they have set boundaries, that it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? If I were to call on them for some random whatever, like if that's a boundary that they've set for themselves, then that's it. And I think it's only been in the last, I would say, so I started therapy in 2020, actually, which was the perfect time. But so I would say in this last like 5 years or so, I have made tremendous strides in being able to establish boundaries and maintain them and not feel any shame about it. I think it's like a threefold or multi-pronged thing. So there's the establishment of the boundaries, then there's the actually like sticking with them, but then it's also not feeling shame around having the boundaries and sticking with them. And those were all 3 things that I had to work through. So I think the biggest thing that I had to unlearn was, or really work at, was not feeling shame, because I was attaching the absence of boundaries to like my self-worth, being a people pleaser and all that kind of stuff.
And this may delve into the next question, which is, what are you learning concerning love and boundaries, right? You mentioned self-worth, you mentioned shame and the concept of shame. Like, what are you learning now concerning love and boundaries?
I'm learning that as, it might seem like, contradictory, but just that boundaries are like are freeing to me, like, and I guess in the conversation we're having about love, I guess maybe it frees you up to be able to love more if you know that you've established these particular boundaries, and nobody, regardless, if it could be my mom, honestly, and that's a whole nother conversation in terms of loving my mom or loving parents, and but still having to establish boundaries in my adulthood and not feeling like that means I love them less or I don't respect them, because I was kind of blurring those lines too. Um, So, but yeah, but in walking more in that, I have never felt more free. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing that I've learned is that um, the more I practice the boundary setting and sticking with them and verbalizing them, not just having them within myself and in my head, but being able to articulate if needed. Because I'm also so a saying that I have is no doesn't need seasoning. So I don't feel like you need to ever over explain yourself, but at the same time, I think context matters. And so there's going to be times like with my mom where I may give her a little bit more because she is my mother. And but but just seeing how once you have done that a number of times, you're basically, I hate to use the word training, but you're teaching people how to treat you and behave around you and respond to you. And after a while, it's no longer, you don't have to actively, every once in a while, people will try it. But after a while, it just becomes, now this is the norm. And I think I just had to learn that is what will happen. I had such a worry and concern about what will happen if I establish this boundary and stick to it, especially in those relationships where I love the people and I believe they love me. And now I see that if that love is really there, it doesn't matter. The boundary doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Or it shouldn't matter. If they truly love me, then they will honor that boundary.
Thank you. And in thinking about just the different levels and types of relationships, what would you offer younger sisters concerning stages of intimacy?
Ooh, now, I think, and this might sound corny or cliche, but I mean, the biggest thing is loving yourself first, because that's another thing that I did not get to, I still am working on in a lot of different ways. And that comes from abuse that I experienced as a young girl. It comes from abandonment issues from the relationship with my father. So there's just a lot of that then led me to be in multiple back-to-back toxic relationships with men. And so I think the stuff with my father, I could not control. I'm a child and I could not control his actions. But I think that just kind of added on to, or it significantly contributed to initial lack of love for myself. And then those relationships that I ended up being in just kind of perpetuated it in well into my adulthood. And once you get to a certain like age of adulthood, people are like, well, she knew better. She knew better because she's a grown woman adult. And it's like, the reality is maybe she didn't, you know what I'm saying? Because of repeated cycles and all kind of things. So I think the biggest thing I would offer is from as early as possible, trying to find ways to love yourself, trying to surround yourself with people who are really, really for you, and praying. If you pray and believe in a higher power, pray for discernment. I mean, that's the biggest thing that has made a difference, I think, in my life as well. Discernment in terms of just who is in your circle, who can support you and help you if you do find yourself in those toxic situations. Sometimes it's so hard to see what is really happening, and you need people around you who are able to like talk real to you, whether you like it or not, you know? So it's just trying to surround yourself with those individuals. And then as soon as possible and you're able, therapy has done wonders for me. So, if that's something that you have access to, definitely taking advantage of therapy. And these days, there are so many resources on social media and other podcasts, free resources if you don't have access to it through like medical insurance or whatever. But just to me, taking advantage of that makes a difference, and the sooner the better. And I say that even if you don't have trauma or whatever, it's made a world of difference for me.
You said, and I want to go a little bit deeper. You said the first thing you would tell younger sisters is to love themselves first.
Mm-hmm.
Can you define what does it mean to love yourself? Like, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Like, can you take us through some of those senses, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think, on a basic level, I think people will automatically think about the physical or whatever. And so I think in that sense, just looking in the mirror, it was a long time where I couldn't even like look at myself in the mirror. I know that probably sounds, I don't know, dramatic, but genuinely, I would avoid it because I just was so disgusted with what I saw. But a lot of that, like I said before, went back to traumas that I had experienced. But so I think on a basic level, just finding a way to love the skin that you are currently in, not having that mindset of, well, I'll feel better or I'll feel happier or others will like me when I get to this certain appearance, whatever that is to you. And even if it is that you want to be healthier or you want to be able to move, easier and more freely, just feel better, having that be for you and more about how you feel physically than trying to live up to some societal standard or thinking that it will help you achieve getting a partner or professional goals, whatever, just making what you do when it comes to your physical appearance be solely about what makes you feel healthy, whole, and free. So I think that's what I would say in terms of the physical piece, but loving yourself also being able to like have your self-talk be positive. And I don't mean in a toxic positivity kind of way, but I mean just that you get so many negative messages from mainstream society from the news and what you do see on social media at times and just the people that you're around in school, whatever the case may be. So having the mental fortitude to be able to talk to yourself in a loving way, in a positive way, in an uplifting way when you're not getting that from anywhere else, to me is self-love. And then the boundaries piece is huge to me when it comes to self-love because, and I talk about this with any of the young women that I and the young men, but when I'm teaching my first year classes, and then I recently started teaching Upward Bound. So they were 11th graders. And I talked to them about, being able to say no and not feeling guilty about it. And one of the questions I asked, it was like a little survey that we did, and it was out of, I would say, maybe 30 students, probably 26 or so, 25, 26, all had some like negative attachment to basically prioritizing themselves. And so we, tried to talk through that. So to me, that is another huge thing that I would tell a young sister is just not to have that guilt associated with prioritizing herself, because how you start is how you finish. So when at an early age, you're already setting others' needs ahead of your own, it just kind of snowballs, I think, into your adult life.
There's another point that you brought up in thinking about the ways in which we mature from adolescence into adulthood, middle adulthood, etc. And that phrase, like, oh, well, they should have known better. Right. And I think in some of the conversations that I have in some of my sister circles and like processing some of the relationships that we are going through or some relationships that have ended, no matter if it's familial, romantic, professional, no matter the context or the type of relationship, that often comes up like, oh, they should have known better because they're in this certain age group, right? Like you have the expectation that that person has some type of self-awareness, that emotional maturity, right? Able to have conversations in regards to conflict resolution. Even though we say that, like, oh, they should have known better, we're basically saying they didn't know better. And here we are, or we went through that process, right? So, in thinking about maturation and expectations, and how if you perhaps don't come from a background in which you were trained better or practiced better, right? That was not the norm. What would you say to someone who don't know better, right? Who's perhaps at that stage of self-awareness, like, oh, dang, like I really didn't learn that coming up in connection to parental wounds.
I think so. Something that I say, and I say it to myself also is, and I talk to my students about, is self-grace. And so I would really encourage them to apply that to themselves. Think about the amount of grace that we extend to other people, people that we do know and love, but also a lot of times random strangers we extend grace to, and we don't extend it to ourselves. And so that would be my main piece of advice, is to, take a step back and think about, is there any point in your life where somebody literally said or gave you guidance on this particular situation that you just found yourself in, you got through it, but people are saying you should have known better, or looking back, maybe you feel like I should have moved differently. Did anybody ever talk to you about it? Did you ever see anybody, demonstrating for you, what this would look like if handled well? And I feel like more often than not, the answer would be no. And so it's like, so how would you have known? So just kind of like walking a person, a young woman, through those questions of self-reflection and thinking about what really happened that led you to this point. Because we place a lot of burden on ourselves, and society does too. But again, I think it goes back to that self-talk, to have known better, because that's what people say to us. But also you have that, when you know that you've dropped the ball on something, I think there's I don't know if normal is the right word, but there's a level of, man, I could have done that better, or I could have handled that situation better. And I think that's fine. Like, that's just a part of the human experience. But when it comes to, and my therapist says this to me all the time, like when you start shaming yourself for it, that is when I have to kind of step in and help you like think differently about it and reframe. Because from the shame then comes other unhelpful and sometimes harmful practices and behaviors. And I think what helps the most with walking ourselves like back from that shame is thinking about what led to the situation, and the reality that oftentimes, because our parents may have also not had certain things modeled for them, they were not doing it for us. And it can be hurtful and you can be upset at your parents, but even having that frame of mind for them, my brother and I have been talking a lot recently about, a lot of times we have in our minds our parents as like, or our guardians like as superhuman, you know what I mean? Like, because of how, who they are to us. But when you really step back and are like, not like, they are human just like us. And especially now, like, I think the age, so my brother is in his mid 40s. I'm about to be 40. I feel like we're really getting to that place where, they talk about now it's like you're in the parent, things flip. And I'm like, whew. So it's just really humanizing our parents, our mom and dad, a lot more. And I think allowing us to have a little bit more compassion for them and the effort that they did make. But it doesn't take away from some of the harm that occurred. because of what they did. But again, I think it just allows us to interact with them differently and then interact with ourselves differently.
Yes. And thinking about that, I think you brought up like intergenerational models. Oftentimes we don't have the models for what we want to become, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't become it, right? Or we won't become it. But if we don't have those models, then sometimes it's more difficult to dream.
Yeah.
Right. So in thinking about intergenerational models, intergenerational possibilities, intergenerational grace, what are some conversations concerning intimacy and parental wounds that we're not having with our mamas, our aunties, our grandmothers, right? That intergenerational conversation that you think we need to be having?
Well, I think for one, when we hear the word intimacy, a lot of times it is only associated with sexual intimacy. And I think that right there is part of the conversation that needs to be had, because I don't recall ever having any conversations with mom, even aunts that I was kind of like closer to coming up that I could have maybe more of those conversations with. We never had those conversations about intimacy being anything else but sex. And then because sex was presented in such a it's bad way, then that is what I'm associating intimacy with as an adult, as I'm going into, well, not even as an adult, but as I began engaging in sexual activity or whatever in my teens. And then like, as I went into, womanhood or whatever, my only thought when it came to intimacy was sex. And it just set me up, along with all this other stuff, it just set me up for failure, I think, in terms of how I was, valuing like myself and my body in relationship with a partner. And so now, being in a healthy relationship, the idea of intimacy being so many other things, just like time spent. And like one of my favorite things to do with my husband, and we've done it since we were dating, is to read to him. And I know that sounds so corny, but but I would read to my friends in college too. Like, so there was a time where a tornado had come and hit the town. And so power was all out. And my boyfriend at the time, he and one of my best friends, we were able to go to this one of the few restaurants that were still open, got food, and I'm reading to them. And that was just, and then we kept doing it like after that, even after the power's back, the tornado's gone. But it just became like, I think, an intimate thing that we did as friends, and I've always loved to read, and I like to read out loud. And so it's just something that I started doing with my husband when we were dating, and we do it now. So to me, just even having moments like that, and then we would start thinking about, oh, if they made a movie of this book, who would play the roles? It just, and so it just becomes a whole experience, kind of, sort of. To me, that is an example of intimacy, because it's something shared with someone that I don't necessarily share with everybody, and we just are so connected in those moments, so I don't know. I think I would wish, if I could go back, I wish my mom and I were able to have more conversations about what real intimacy is, and that it can look different for everyone, and that it can be something that shows up in more than just romantic relationships. Yeah, I think those would be the biggest things.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So in thinking about expanding the definition of intimacy, if you were to have this conversation with your mother, say tomorrow or 2 weeks from now, right? Like, what would that conversation look like in saying, hey, mom, perhaps we should expand the definition of intimacy? Like, what questions would you have for her, or what insights would you offer?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my first question would be to ask her, like, how would she define intimacy, or what does she think of when she hears the word? Because another thing so my parents are divorced, and they separated when I was 12. And so, I mean, it's been a long time that I think for some of the more pivotal years of my life, when I'm really growing into myself or whatever, they were not together. But my memories of the time when they were together, and my brother and I will talk about this sometimes, it's like, I had friends who their parents are married to this day, but I remember like going to being at their houses and their parents were not really affectionate or anything like that. They never really, I would not really hear them saying like, I love you to each other or anything. And it seemed weird to me because in my household, like my parents were not like over the top, but they were like, would be huggy. And, so I feel like I saw intimacy that wasn't sex, but they just were intimate with one another. It was just very obvious that they had a caring and a loving for one another, and affection for one another. And then they extended that to us. Like we always hugged, and I know for a fact that neither of them got that in their households growing up. So I always just found it amazing that I don't know if it's one of those things as a parent where you're like, when I have kids, I'm definitely not doing this, or I'm definitely going to do this. And some of the stuff you are successful on and some you're not. And I think for both of them, that's something that they really were, I don't know, like serious about. And so, and I appreciated that. But for me, it would show up in my relationships where like, if I was with somebody who they did not grow up like that, they were not touchy-feely or whatever, there was definitely a disconnect because I'm like, why are you acting like that? You know what I mean? And so I had to realize that everybody did not grow up with that. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them or with me or whatever, but it's just we had different experiences. So I bring all that up to say that I would really be interested in asking my mom just how she defines it and is how they connected with each other in that way part of what she imagined as intimacy. And I feel like we were really close as a family before they split. And so just doing things like we would have the four of us, like these really robust game nights. Music was also a thing that really, really connected our family. And I feel like in those moments, the different things that we did around music, there was intimacy just within our family. So I don't know. I don't know all the things I would want to ask her, but I think just starting with like, how does she define it? And maybe what are some moments that she can remember from when we were all together that she would describe as intimacy?
Thank you. So you brought up the fact that you're a wife, you're a daughter, you're a scholar, you're a business owner, right? So considering all of your primary roles, what is a reminder to yourself to circle back to feel grounded?
So lately, another thing that I have been saying to myself is rest is queen. And I put it on a mug, I put it on a shirt because I was actually at a conference yesterday, and one of the keynote speakers, she was telling her story, and she said that the word brave was was key to her story. And so she wanted the audience to go through and list words for each letter. And so I think for B, somebody said bold. And so for R, people were saying like resilience and some other word, responsibility. And in my head, the very first word that came to my mind was rest, child, because and I know that like over the past few years, I feel like rest has been the wave, or at least like a buzzword that people have capitalized on, and genuinely or not. But I also think that sometimes it's easy to say it, but it's harder to actually do it. And so for me right now, when I'm feeling kind of, like I was saying, overwhelmed with even the goodness, rest is queen is what I've been saying to myself, because it's like I cannot. Last year, I was in a very, very toxic work environment. And I've been in work environments where, my supervisor was ridiculous, like whatever, but it wasn't necessarily toxic, you know what I'm saying, to the point where I am physically not well, mentally not well, this person, she just getting on my nerves, and I'll vent to my friend about it later. But last year, I had not experienced anything like that before. And that's what ultimately I had been intending to go and transition at some point into full-time entrepreneurship, but not this soon. But for my overall wellness, for my literal sanity, like, I had to go ahead and make that leap. And I'm thankful to my husband for being a covering for me in that way so that I could do that. And that's a privilege because I know everyone doesn't have that. And so I'm very thankful for that. But in the presentation that I was giving yesterday, one of the things we talked about was we were talking about emotional labor and workplace wellness for Black women. And I was saying how there are a number of Black women who, if some will opt to remain in their 9 to 5 in their, in the traditional kind of career path, and that's totally fine. But so we have to talk through and figure out how are we supporting one another in that space. But then there are also several Black women who are choosing to leave and go into entrepreneurship. And based on my own experience in talking to other Black women, what's happening sometimes is that you're so entrenched in the traditional, like, workplace norms are so ingrained in you that you find yourself operating in those same ways in your own business. And so I'm saying to myself, like, what was the point of you leaving that toxic space if you were going to keep operating in the same way? And a huge piece of that is the rest component, because it had got to the point where I was not even, like, sleeping, barely eating, like, and so I haven't gotten to that place, but even just the meeting culture. So the back to back to back to back meetings where you can't even, how are you supposed to be getting your work done? And so then it's almost like you're forced to have to work after hours or on the weekends or when you should be on leave. And so I've tried to just be more intentional about how I'm scheduling my time. I'm still a work in progress with it, but I refuse to operate in those same toxic ways. And so again, that kind of grounding thing that I say to myself is rest is queen.
I think that's wonderful. I have these ongoing conversations with Black women who are in different fields, but in regards to the expectation, which not only Black women, which I think is just US society,
Yeah.
in which work is so centralized that it takes up more than 40 hours or the 37 hours of our work week, even though we say that's full time, we know that's not the truth, right? So, and even thinking about, like you said, the concept of emotional labor and a lot of the invisible labor that Black women and other women of color and other marginalized folks tend to put on in spaces, especially during the wave of the quarantine when diversity was like queen, like really a buzzword.
Yeah.
Let's really be diverse and inclusive. So let's call up on the folks who would check off the diversity box, right? A lot of that emotional labor
Yeah.
they put on for these institutions, organizations. But now the pendulum has swung back where DEI is now a threat in a lot of spaces. Like we see it politically, we see it in the ways in which work culture have shifted or more so really shown itself, right? So in thinking about you saying that rest is queen, what does that look like as you're learning to do work differently? Like, does it look like I don't schedule more than 2 meetings back to back, right? Does it look like I'm going to make sure that I end work at this certain time of day or that midday I go for a walk, etc.? Like, what does rest look like for you now, like on a daily practice or weekly practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think number one, so when I started therapy back in 2020, one of the first, we did our intake, right? And she said, and we talked about all the stuff why I was there or why I thought I was there. And, so I'm sure, she went back and created a treatment plan. But it was funny because when it was time for me to move out here and I wasn't going to be able to continue on with her, we were kind of reflecting on my progress. And I was like, man, like, out of all that stuff that I said that I wanted to work on, we spent the majority of that first year just focused on my time, because I would always be saying, she was like, for you, everything comes back to time. She said, you're always saying, I don't have time for that. And we say that kind of like being funny, but she's like, but you mean it literally, like your, your time, you don't have time, just to be wasted, because my schedule was already always so jam packed. And so she was working with me to get out of the habit of somebody's asking me, can you do this? I look in my planner or my phone, my calendar on my phone, see an open spot. And I'm like, yes, regardless of what else is going on in that day. I could have had 20 other things going on that day, but that little slot is open. So I'm saying yes and making it the 21st. And she's like, you're doing too much. Like, so she really worked with me. I know it probably seemed super simplistic, but I needed that accountability and that kind of like coaching and support because I also kept framing that as I'm doing nothing. And she was like, stop saying that. Like, she was like, you're not doing nothing. You're resting. You're just sitting there, reflecting, or you're reading a book or whatever. And so that was that was a game changer for me, because when I'm saying I'm doing nothing, I view that as a negative. Like, you got to be doing something. And I think that even goes back to, we see those memes where it talks about in the Black household, if you sick, you better not laugh. You better not be, you can't be watching TV. Like, you need to be just laying there. And so just the idea that you always need to be moving and doing something, like there's something wrong with resting. That was, my mentality and how I was operating. So fast forward to now, I keep that in mind. And so I got really, really good at being able to say no to stuff, not feeling guilty about it. And the other piece of that was there being times where I had committed to something, and then I could be sick. I have really bad migraines. I could have a migraine. Anything could be happening. Or maybe I'm just not feeling it because I have really bad anxiety as well. And so, but forcing myself to still show up, which then would be a ripple effect, because now I'm not showing up well or how I need to later on in the week, the next week. And I'm just the biggest piece being that I'm not well. And so I also had to get to the point where I was okay. I'm not saying that you just every day be scheduling stuff and canceling, but just generally speaking, that it's okay to have to go back on something. But in my mind, it's like, if I cancel now, they're gonna think, like, being overly concerned about somebody else's perception of me because I'm taking care of myself. Like, I had to get out of that. So I'm giving you that context to say that now what it looks like for me is, as I'm building, so I'm was building out some different scheduling links in Google Calendar. And I had almost reverted back. So I was giving spots like bam, 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 back to back. And I said, no, because it clearly gives you an option. Like, do you want to build in 30 minutes, however much time in between each meeting? And then it does ask you, like, how many meetings do you want to have in this day? And at first I had like 5. And I was like, girl, you tripping. Like, because the energy, the mental energy, even the emotional energy, depending on what you're talking about, that it takes to have 5 meetings in one day is a lot. But I'm in my head, I'm like, well, that's what you've been doing. But it's like, they don't care about your mental, your well-being and stuff like that. So yes, they were allowing you to be able to schedule that many back to back and expecting you to show up and perform at 100% at each and every one of them, and questioning why your face look a little certain way when, you just looking tired in a meeting. And so, so yes, so now I have it where the max is, I think I either did 2 or 3. I only schedule the meetings for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I went through a business academy a couple years ago, and they always talked about the importance of having an admin day. So reserving, Monday or Friday for the admin day, and then the other day for just rest. Or just, and when I say admin day, like, even having that day be for if I have doctor's appointments or need to make a run. Because for me, even I would have left the other day that should be my rest day as the day for doctor's appointments and doing the errands. That's not resting, not for me. Like, because I'm so exhausted by the time I get back in. It's like when they say you go on a vacation and then you need a vacation from the vacation, you know? So again, it's a work in progress, but those are some of the initial things just in setting up my calendar that I try to be mindful of. And I'm getting better because I found myself in this past month having just because it's a small business. I'm trying to grow the business. I have to network. I mean, that's just a fact. And so putting myself in these spaces, but in doing so, I'm exhausted a lot of times because back home when I was working in DC, like happy hour was the thing. That was the networking in a lot of ways. And I never would attend those things because I was working a quote unquote good government job. And like, I just didn't feel the need to, and I knew how it was going to drain me. And so I just didn't do it. And my mom always ingrained in us that like, you're not going to work for friends and all this other stuff. So there were a lot of reasons why I wasn't going, but a huge part of it was because I just didn't have the energy for it. But now here, it's not necessarily happy hours, but it's like different, like they have like mentoring Mondays, or they'll have like this meet and greet or that meet and greet where it's a lot of professionals or new entrepreneurs or whatever coming together and just an opportunity. So great opportunities, but just reminding myself I cannot be at everything. And so as a matter of fact, I attended this one mentoring Monday about a month ago, and they had like a speed. It was like speed networking, and they had the mentors going to different tables instead of us moving around. But anyway, this one woman came, and I can't remember what her role was, but whatever it was, I thought she would be a good person to ask this. And so I was saying to her, as someone who's not from here, but I am trying to tell the stories of individuals out here without in an ethical way with integrity. And so, but I also am running a business here. So I said, how do I connect with individuals in organizations, in a way that is authentic, or that they can feel my authenticity, and where they are, where they're aware that I'm not coming in and trying to take advantage. You know what I mean? And because I know that, and I can communicate and articulate that, but I'm also aware of situations where, people say that and it's really the opposite is true. And I said, but how do I also do that without overextending myself? Because in my mind, the way to do that is to be at everything, show up, show them that I'm in it with them. But I said, but I'm exhausted. And so she was saying how she had found herself in a similar space a while ago. And she realized that she had to identify for like any given period of time, maybe one to two organizations that she would really commit to going to their events, getting to know people there. And then, you have to identify yourself. What is that time frame? And then when can you kind of begin to engage with another organization? And it's not to say that you would never go to something else, but kind of having that focus for that given period of time helped her not overextend herself. And it made a lot of sense to me. So that's just another thing that I've been trying to apply now, is not feeling like it's like the fear of missing out, so not feeling like because I'm not at every event that I'm going to be missing out on business. Because at the end of the day, what's for me is for me. And I truly believe that. So it's also reminding myself of that the buildings and the spaces that I'm supposed to be in, praying for that. Sorry about that if you can hear it, but praying for that discernment, that I'll be guided to those spaces that I need to be in when I'm supposed to be in them.
That's beautiful. I often tell myself, what's for me is for me, and it will come with ease.
Yes.
I think it's definitely connected to that, right? Like FOMO, like fear of missing out, just feeling as though you have to overextend and just in order to build these networks.
Yeah.
But in one of the episodes, Dr. Tahir Mahdi said, it's my time. It's my time to feel good, right? To be in a certain space, and the people who are for me, they're gonna come. Like, I may not even know who they are, but they'll arrive. So I think it definitely connects with your mindset of privileging your time so that you can rest as normal.
Yes.
And I don't know if you saw in recent past how rest was being like marketed as luxury.
Hmm.
And I didn't like that.
Uh-uh. Nope.
I don't know if
Because
it was
that
a hashtag, but it was definitely a conversation like, oh, like rest is luxury. I'm like, no, rest is essential.
essential. Because it also positions rest as something that only a select few could have access to. And it's like, no, it's essential for everyone. So yeah, I don't like that either.
Exactly. Okay, so I have to see what some of your rest is queen you said. What'd you say?
Yeah, rest is queen.
Okay, we have to see what some of that merch looks like. So you said you put it on a mug. Yes.
Yes.
So in thinking about rest and love and boundaries and intimacy, this is a question that I'm asking everyone for this season. How do you know if someone loves you?
I know you probably like you be sighing on all of them, but these are good
Do what you
questions.
do, sis. Do what you do.
Um, so for me, um, so it's funny because I when we did premarital counseling through our church, and when we went through it, it was good. It was helpful and everything like that. And my husband really enjoyed it. And, you know, as someone who's not really, not that he's anti-therapy, but he's not like on the wave like I am. Like I'm talking about therapy all day, every day, because because it's done so much for me. But I understand everybody's not there yet and everything. But I was thankful for the opportunity to do the premarital counseling because it opened him up, you know, a little bit to just what that can look like, even though counseling and therapy aren't necessarily the same. But just that experience of talking about our stuff with someone else, you know, it opened him up to that and how it can be beneficial. And so I bring that up because from there, I was like, well, you know how we talk about, or they talk about how you don't have to wait until something bad has happened to go to therapy. And that's how I felt about marriage counseling. So I said, well, would you be open to us just continuing to do marriage counseling from the get, like monthly or bi week, whatever, however our schedule allows, but not waiting until stuff has hit the fan. But let's just continue because even in the best of relationships, I mean, it can be challenging sometimes to talk about harder topics. And so it at least gives us a space to do that and with an unbiased party. And so he was open to it. And so we've done that. And so I share that because in a few of the sessions, I have talked about how I know that he loves me because listen, I am a whole lot. Okay. Like from so I about 2 years ago got an official ADHD diagnosis. Now me and my friends been new. Okay. But, but getting that official diagnosis, you know, it was significant because of just being able to now to tap into more specific resources and tools, so on and so forth, to try to get that support that I needed. But between that, seriously, because of the way that my mind and brain works, and then I also have other like kind of PTSD like responses to certain things. So certain things like I need to be a certain way that wouldn't make sense to someone else that doesn't have these experiences, but just for me to feel settled like in my home or safe in my space, I need things to be a certain way. And that is a lot. I know for somebody else, especially when you're talking about living in that same space. And you cannot just write it off as, well, that's your spouse, like they're supposed to do it. No, if a person is coming from a space, I think it goes back to like what they saw modeled, or if they were living as a grown adult by themselves for many, many years, if that is not how they were living their life, you're now combining these two, you know, ways of living. And so I say that to say that when she's had us do these exercises where we're just naming and speaking the reasons why we love each other and why we know the other person loves us, I talk a lot of times about how I'm not going to say loving me is not easy or is hard. I wouldn't frame it as that, but I think that it's required him to move and operate very differently than he would not even just being by himself, but just existing with somebody else. And because he was previously living before I came out here with his brother. And, so anytime you're living with somebody else, because me and my best friend lived together for a while, it requires some shifts. But even living with my best friend, there's certain things that I wasn't going to like expect of her without going into detail, that now you're talking about a lifetime, because we knew that was temporary, right? We're not going to be living together forever. But with this, I mean, the hope and expectation is that we living together forever. And so I think you have to go deeper with the stuff that you are kind of shifting yourself with. And so for me, one of the many ways that I know that he loves me is that the way that he has put himself out to accommodate my OCD, my, the ADHD, and then some of the other like trauma responses that I have to things, where he doesn't have to do that, because like I said, it's easy to say because that's the person's partner or spouse that they have to do it. But they don't, so to me, that is a show of love, to be able to, even when it doesn't make sense to you why a person needs this, be willing to do it anyway so that they feel safe. To me, that is a demonstration of love. So I think even detaching it from the romantic piece, the key thing in what I said to me that would show somebody that somebody loves me is that they're willing to be around me, stay around me, even when I don't make sense to them.
That's good. Even if it doesn't make sense, I do it because I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And connected to that, when do you feel like you're loving yourself the most?
I feel like I'm loving myself the most. I would just say now, like this, when you ask me about this season in my life, because I talked about like not even being able to look at myself sometimes. So I would say in this past year, I have just become much more free in my body. You know what I mean? Like, and not feeling shame around it, not feeling like disgusted by myself. Like just I had such negativity toward myself and just my being, that again, I feel like somebody wouldn't understand from the outside looking in, because all they see is accomplishments and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that for me has nothing to do with it. When I'm looking at myself and thinking of myself, I'm not thinking about my academics and stuff like that. And so anyway, just in this past year, I have gotten more comfortable trying new things in terms of just like what I wear and stuff like that. Because growing up, there was a lot of shame. I believe that my mom had an unhealthy like relationship with herself as well. I cannot speak for her, but I believe that just based off of some of the things that I know in terms of my grandfather was to a certain extent emotionally abusive, particularly around weight. And I think my mom unintentionally kind of projected some of that onto me. And I internalized that. And so it has taken a long time for me to get out of viewing my body in that way. And even sometimes viewing others' bodies in that way, because it's like if you're constantly told, "Well, a woman shouldn't be looking like that," or "Why she," that is how other women and their bodies would be talked about. So that's what I'm thinking it is. You shouldn't. So I don't know how graphic I can get, but like just like. Which is not graphic, it's a natural thing, but just like even your nipples showing and stuff like that, like that was taught to me as being something shameful, and that they should, when it's really a natural function of your body, you know what I mean? Right. So having to cover that up, and then like I just a lot of different aspects of my body just being talked about as things to be covered up and to be ashamed of. I have really, really worked to unlearn and get out of. And I don't want to put that all on my mom. It also has to do with some of the things I experienced in my younger years, where I've had to really work through therapy to get to a place where I don't associate that stuff with my body, which was also really, really steeped in shame and guilt. So now when I'm able to try different things with my clothing, again, stuff that might seem really simple and small to somebody else, but just experimenting more, and it feels really, really good. And some things, I'm like, yes, like that's it. Like you look good. Some stuff didn't work out as well, but it's just the exploration. I'm really enjoying that because there's a freedom to it. Yeah, so I would say like right. I know I don't think this is what you meant by the question, but I feel like I'm loving myself the most right now, like in terms of the entire span of my life, because it also is about the boundary setting and me for the first time in my life actually being able to stick to them. Something like the other night. So I'm an advisor from one of the student orgs on campus, and we've really been working with them about respecting time because it's an advising team, and we have to be at everything that they do, and somebody has to be at everything that they do, and so there's just been generally a lack of respect for time in terms of like just last minute changes and not communicating. And so I'm just on the team. I'm not the lead advisor. And so the lead advisor has for a long time just been accommodating, which requires us to then have to accommodate. And I was finally like, I got to put my foot down because I can't operate like this. We've communicated it to them. We've modeled it for them. And so we were supposed to have a meeting Thursday night at 9 o'clock, which was already pushing it for me because I knew I needed to be wrapping things up by 10. But then the student decided let's push it, or you know what I'm saying, like last minute trying to change it, and I was like,
9
oh no,
p.m.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
and so. But just even being able, because it wasn't about standing up to the student. In this instance, it's a group of other women that are part of this team that were willing to push the meeting and be meeting even later. And I know how these meetings go. So it's easy to say, oh, we're only going to be on for 15 minutes. No, we're not. We're going to be on for at least 30, 40 minutes, if not longer. So being able to just, especially with the majority of the women, well, all of them are older than me. They're Black women. So then you're talking about like the respect component that I think is just a part of our community, but being able to say like, no, I cannot do that. And so then they were like, what about, can we just push 15 minutes? No, because I'm like 15 minutes, it's just going to get later and later. So so that is a part of me loving myself the most right now, because that's something that I would have been right up there on that call at 10 o'clock. Years ago. You see what I'm saying? And so that is a part of me loving myself. And then also I was just marveling the other day about how even in just introducing myself with confidence and talking about my business and stuff, like how much I've grown in that area, because it's always been ingrained. And I think it's not generalizable, but I think a lot of the Black community has this like passed down over generations idea of we have to be humble, the importance of, humility and not thinking much of yourself and stuff like that. And, it's very much like that in my family. I mean, I tell how when, my mom will be like, I know she's proud of me, but she'll be like, don't be thinking much of yourself because you got a PhD. Like she says that all the time. Or she'll say stuff like, I could be saying, oh, you might want to take a BC for that or something like she got a headache. And she'll be like, you're not a medical doctor. Like, it's just, it's those little things that are said. And again, like, I know she's proud of me. I know she doesn't mean any harm, but it's still, to me, it kind of speaks to that you got to keep people like from getting a big head or not, like I said, thinking much of themselves or whatever. And so for the longest time, it made me uncomfortable to even be referred to by my title, I've always been like, and now this is me. Like, I don't ever walk into the room like everybody better call me Dr. Such and Such. Now, there's a time and a place, because there's been times in the professional realm where because the people have already demonstrated a lack of respect, I got to walk in the room like that. But other than that, like generally speaking, unless it's with my students, like I don't. And I also worked for the Department of Ed where a lot of the people there have those higher degrees. And so everybody is not walking around calling each other Dr. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so. But I have had to get more comfortable with, I am Dr. Latasha Nicole Eley Kelly, and I own this. I'm founder of this, just speaking, just standing in who I am and what I do and what I've been blessed with, my talents, my gifts. And that has not always been easy. But the more I do it, the easier it becomes, the more natural it becomes, and the more empowering it is. And so, again, all of those things are me loving myself the most right now.
I think the question is your lived experience. So you always answer right if it's your lived experience. And before we sign off, is there anything that you didn't say in this space that you would like to say? Yeah, there's anything that you haven't shared already that you would like to share. I did hear the word freedom or free a lot.
I would just say that, so I'm currently working on a project and it's really focused on, the Black experience, as is the majority of what I do. But one of the things that we talk about is those times when we say, I love being Black or I love us. And so I know we've been talking more about like just love in a different way. But I just wanted to bring that up because that aspect of the Black experience is so meaningful to me. I love when I'm on social media and I see people put that. And I kind of have started kind of curating a collection of those moments because it's just it gives me goosebumps almost. Like it's just such a heartwarming and connecting like feeling an experience really, because it's almost like I feel like if it's a video or something like that, it's almost like I feel like I'm there because I've experienced that thing before. I know what that feels like. And so I love that. And I love it for us. I love that we have that. And so that's it. I just wanted to bring that up in the context of our conversation on love.
So this is connected to the question, are you working on any recent projects or services that you would like to share? I know you shared the name of your business and the fact that you are curating a space. So if you want to share a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So I encourage anyone who's interested to visit the millennialblackprofessor.com. And so there you'll be able to kind of see all of the services that I offer, one of them being speaking engagements. And so that's yesterday I had 2 speaking engagements, but typically I'm doing work around supporting underrepresented populations. And so I think I mentioned the business academy that I went through a couple of years ago, and they had invited me back to teach in the program. And I was like, at the time, I was like, child, I'm trying to pull my business together. Like, I'm supposed to teach somebody. And they were like, you have a PhD, like you can teach anything. And I'm like, that's really not how that works. But But I was like, listen, I'm gonna make it work because I'm also very big on challenging myself, as it pertains to within reason. Like, so, I felt like it was something that I could do. And I knew that it would be something I would grow from. So, and that's exactly what it was. But what I found, so when I went through that business academy, I was all over the place with my business idea. I was talking about, I'm doing t-shirts, like a merch line. I'm doing a blog, podcast. I'm doing editing, all kind of stuff. And they were like, we really need you to focus on one, on one thing. And then you can apply, the principles and things that you learn to whatever else. So I focused on editing because I have been doing so much work supporting just like friends, sorors, whoever in their academic writing, their dissertations. But I wasn't charging. I was just doing it. And one of my sorors was like, the next time that we work together, I'm going to pay you. She was like, because this is your time, this is your effort, this is your energy. And at first I was like, no. But then I'm like, no. When I really started thinking about the amount of time that I had committed to it, in part it's because, yes, I just love supporting my community and just, marginalized individuals who may not otherwise get this support. But at the same time, like I got to live too, So I said, she's right. So that's what I decided to focus on through the academy. What I realized though was that when I actually started trying to market myself for that and started getting clients, I don't enjoy it. I think it was one thing when I was doing it just to be helping some people, but to actually have that be like what I'm doing day in and day out, I did not find joy in that. And again, it goes back to, I don't want to be working for myself, doing something that I dread, every day. So I went back to the drawing board and was like, what are those things in my life that, for lack of a better word, like I love to do, that I really enjoy doing, that bring me fulfillment. And as I'm sure you can tell from this conversation, I love to talk. And so I was like, and I love to teach, you know what I mean? I genuinely love that feeling of just being able to see in such a small amount of time the growth in a student, or just seeing how, even if it's just one thing that I brought up in class, or some small piece of feedback that was like a game changer for them. I just love that feeling. And so I was like, how can I translate that into my business and what I'm doing? And that's when I was like, I need to just be doing workshops and speaking and things like that. So I did a workshop just a few weeks ago at Wichita State University on overcoming and combating imposter syndrome. And that was received really well. And then, like I shared earlier yesterday, I spoke about emotional labor. And then I also recently did a panel on the unlearning the Black church model as it pertains to our mental health. So those are kind of the kind of topics and areas that I focus on, just what I call working within wellness. How can we do that in the different ways that we show up in our lives? So I just encourage everyone to visit the millennialblackprofessor.com, and on socials, it's at the Millennial Black Professor, to see all things that I'm doing. And then in terms of the project, it is going to be a podcast called Black in One Piece that launches Juneteenth, 2024.
That's beautiful. I'm looking forward to tuning into the podcast. Yeah, that's awesome. I know we didn't get the opportunity yet just to talk more in depth about it between you and I, like offline. So I'm definitely looking forward to that conversation. So, Dr. Tasha, in regards to your social media, do you have any any other public social medias that folks can follow you at, or was that your primary?
Those are the primary for the business. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's just Latasha Eley Kelly. And when you go there, you'll be able to link out to the Millennial Black Professor LinkedIn page.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. So again, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Tasha Eley Kelly, in regards to sharing your experience so far in this season of your life concerning love. So as I will always say at the end, love is real and eternal. So sis, let's practice love.
Hey y'all, welcome to the McKissick Health Podcast Network, where you can listen to immersive story-driven series and interview-based shows, including the McKissick Health Podcast, Good Luck Chuck Podcast, The Experience, Creative Conversations with Brianna Elmore, and my show, Lirae Journey. Listen to the Lirae Journey podcast on all platforms and follow us on social media at Lirae Journey. You can also find us online at podcast.mckissickhealth.com. That's podcast.mckissickhealth.com. So come on in.